Good evening and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. There is new video of a San Francisco police shooting that killed a man last week. Several officers fired at 26-year-old Mario Woods, who the police department says was carrying a knife and was the suspect in a stabbing earlier in the day. We're going to show you this new video, but first we want to warn you it is disturbing.
Are you serious?
Stay back!
Are you serious?
What?
Are you serious?
Can I get off? No, stay there.
Are you serious?
Oh
Are you
my
serious?
God!
Stop! Oh my God!
What the?
You have to shoot him that many times!
Hey.
That video was released earlier today by John Burris, the attorney representing Woods' family. He filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against the police department this morning. Joining me now to discuss the shooting is Dr. Joe Marshall, a member of the San Francisco Police Commission. Thank you for coming here.
Thank you.
What is your reaction to the video?
That is hard to watch. I'm telling you that. Wow. The other one was hard to watch. That one was even harder to watch. It really hurts watching it. Well, I mean, to me, it's pretty evident. You know, he had a knife. You know, he's closed off. He gets shot, he's gunned down. There's a bunch of other fire. And my reaction from watching it, and I think most people's reaction has been from it just didn't make any sense. Just doesn't make any sense the way that happened.
Is it excessive use of force?
Well, I've said all along that the tough thing here is that even if it's in policy, it probably didn't have to happen that way, even if it's in policy. And that's the whole thing. It has to make sense, and probably to most people would say it's excessive. I think clearly.
Do you think it's excessive, though?
I don't see, well, there's a whole lot of things I think about it. Maybe the biggest thing is the whole notion of when one officer fired, all the officers had to fire on somebody with a knife. It doesn't make any sense to me. I said this from the beginning. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Everybody who's seen it, it doesn't make any sense to them. It certainly looks excessive. It seems excessive. My big issue is, could something else have been done differently? Probably looking at it, something else should have been done differently. And if anything else couldn't be done differently under the way we currently operate, then we just got to change the way we operate. It's pretty straightforward to me.
So the Police Commission is now reviewing the department's use of force policy. What changes do you think are needed? Well,
we got to review what we do. We have to review what we do. It's shouting out, do things differently, do things differently. And I think the two things for me, obviously, I mean, for me anyway, this is a knife, right? These are guns trained on a guy with a knife, and not just one gun. I mean, many guns trained on a guy with a knife. Why are we using gun tactics with somebody with a knife? That's the first thing. The second is when one officer fires, all the other officers fire. To me, that's support fire. Why are we using support fire on somebody who has a knife? I mean, he can't do anything to you. So he doesn't have a gun, he can't shoot you back. Those are the two glaring things that need to be looked at. But overall, our whole way we approach incidents, we got to get more in a de-escalation mindset. We've got to get into a crisis intervention mindset. You know, most folks who have seen this have said, you know, the young man appeared in stress, under duress, maybe even in some sort of mental thing. Why couldn't we bring out? My understanding is that we're crisis intervention trained officers available. Could we not have used them more? It's the de-escalation piece that we've got to get into. We've got to look at our training. We've got to look at everything. We've got to look at, this begs to say, San Francisco, you got to do things differently when it comes to use of force.
And it's being said by a lot of people at this week's police commission meeting. A lot of people were clearly angry at the police department.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at some of the.
Black people are still here. We may be less than 6%, but we're still here. And it's time for you guys to treat us with dignity and respect. You should not be leading this police department. You should be fired, Chief Sir.
I'd also.
So should Chief Sir be fired?
Well, I support the chief. I've said it all along.
You support the chief.
Yeah,
you continue to support him even now.
I do. Yeah. I mean, well, this is a good chief. Number one, I've seen him do things. All the jobs he's gotten for young people. He developed a program this summer and paid interns, paid young people just to study the police department. That's all he's done. He paid them to do that. There's an officer in the Bayview, at Bayview Station, who wanted to take young people to Africa. He sanctioned that and has helped with that. So there have been a lot of things that he has done, reaching out, trying to mend the breach between the community and the department. The issue is this happened on his watch.
And the issue also is
this, all the good work that he's done is being undone by this incident.
But the other issue also is that this is not the only incident. This is the 6th officer-involved shooting so far this year, and at least 2 of those incidents, the police department's accounts have come under scrutiny. We have the case of Amilcar Perez Lopez, who police said was lunging at officers in February when they opened fire, but 2 autopsies found that he was actually shot in the back. And now we have this video, and this newly released video today, that sort of almost contradicts what Chief Sir said when he said that Mario Woods was coming at one of the officers. You don't see that in this video. How concerned are you about these inconsistencies that the chief is putting forth? Well,
I'm concerned. First, the official investigation's got to take place. They got to decide if all these things are in policy. I'm concerned about the whole thing. I'm a community person. I work with young people. I bury young people. I don't like community violence. I don't like police violence. So I'm concerned. What the commission can do is change the policies. And that's what we're trying to do, is change the policies. We want to work hard at changing the policies. Folks don't know, when you lose a chief, you got to put another one in. It takes 6 months to get a new chief. All our efforts will be there. They need to be as far as I'm concerned, developing these policies and procedures. And so, and what I know about this particular chief and all the work that he has done, I'm not advocating that.
You've been on the police commission for 11 years.
Yeah.
Is this the worst crisis you've ever seen? We've seen lots of different crises in this city. Fajita Gate. We've seen problems at the crime lab. We've seen problems with racist and homophobic texts.
Yeah.
Is there a problem within the culture of the police department? Is it the worst crisis you've seen?
Well, there's definitely problems. There's definitely problems. And as we find out these problems, we address them. When I got on the commission, there was a backlog of cases. We've been able to address that backlog and get it down. Get it way, way down. We fired, actually dismissed several officers as we find them. The problem with the commission is that we get things on the back end. But there's a lot of things that we need to do. The policy is the big thing that we can address. This points out that we definitely have a problem with our policies, our procedures, and our training, and we're going to try and address that, absolutely.
And I know that you're going to try to put out a document by January 3rd with some suggested recommendations. But Dr. Joe Marshall, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
In a primetime address to the nation this week, President Obama once again called for tougher restrictions on the sale of assault weapons.
To begin with, Congress should act to make sure no one on a no-fly list is able to buy a gun. What could possibly be the argument for allowing a terrorist suspect to buy a semi-automatic weapon? This is a matter of national security. We also need to make it harder for people to buy powerful assault weapons, like the ones that were used in San Bernardino.
In the wake of that shooting, gun control is once again an issue in the presidential campaign, with Republican candidates vowing to block any new legislation. Here to discuss how the San Bernardino attacks are affecting the political debate are KQED politics reporter Marisa Lagos, and Scott Shafer, senior editor for KQED's Politics and Government Desk. Welcome to you both. Scott, to what extent is the gun control discussion affecting presidential politics?
Well, it is. And we've had in the past few weeks 3 big events: the Paris shootings, also the clinic, the Planned Parenthood shooting in Colorado, and then most recently San Bernardino. And guns, of course, were a common thread of all those. In the Democratic primary, Hillary Clinton is really using the gun control issue against Bernie Sanders, really, because he's been a little inconsistent on that issue. She did a TV ad about it, although it didn't run a whole lot, but she's gotten a lot of attention on that. She thinks it distinguishes her from Bernie Sanders on the Democratic side. On the Republican side, you know, they're very much about supporting the first responders, wishing well the victims and the families. But I think the big issue, the overriding issue really is terrorism. That's what's really affecting the presidential campaign, because as these events have unfolded, you're seeing in the polls a decrease in support for gun control, at least nationwide and in places like New Hampshire. And so the candidates, Donald Trump in particular, are adjusting to that reality.
And it seems to be giving him a boost, Trump in this case, because there was a new New York Times poll that came out that says that lots of Republicans favor him based on what they believe is strong leadership, even more so than honesty, electability, empathy, experience.
Yeah, well, I think as these things happen, people become afraid. They're worried about themselves and their families. They can see themselves in some of these situations at an office party, at a clinic, you know, shopping at a mall or at a concert. And so it does make people more, in some cases, receptive to extreme things. We've seen it in France as well, just recently with the election there. So it's playing out especially on the Republican side right now in the primary.
And I think in general, you know, the issue really is whatever Hillary Clinton says or the Republican candidates say, there's little support in Congress for gun control measures. I don't think whoever the next president is that we're going to see national action on this issue, not only because of the polls, but because you have people from across the nation being, you know, these very diverse districts where their constituents are saying, we don't support this in certain places, and Republicans control Congress.
There was also some feeling in 2000, Bill Clinton, in fact, said that Al Gore was really hurt by the NRA and the opposition to gun control. This time around, though, the pro-gun control groups are much better organized, and so it's a little more nuanced, and I think it's emboldened Hillary Clinton, perhaps, to step forward on this issue, and locally, I know we're going to talk about this as well, but Gavin Newsom, too.
Well, and I think that's a great point, because what we've seen is some groups, specifically the ones who are funded by former Mayor Bloomberg from New York, saying we're going to basically take a page from the NRA and organize more in smaller sort of you know, on the city level, on the state level. And I think so maybe in 2 years, again, when we're looking at congressional elections, there could be a shift. But I don't see in the near term that that's going to happen.
But even speaking at the state level, for example, California, where Democrats control the state legislature, it's been a mixed bag. Democrats tend to support gun control, and yet a few measures failed to pass. Quite a few failed to pass.
Yeah, it really is a mixed bag. I looked at legislative records since 2011 when Jerry Brown took office. And I was really interested to see, because California does have, according to groups like the Brady Campaign against gun violence, you know, that we do have some of the strongest gun control laws in the nation. But since 2011, there's been almost 100 gun measures introduced. Some of those aren't necessarily gun control measures. Governor Jerry Brown signed 28 of them, but he's vetoed 13, and the legislature itself has killed another 28. So it really is a mixed bag there, and you know, there doesn't always seem to be a method to the madness in terms of the types of legislation that's getting through the legislature or not.
So no pattern to the Democrats who are opposing certain measures?
There is. When you look at individual votes, I think that it's pretty common to see moderate Democrats from more rural areas where there might be more gun owners join with Republicans to vote against these bills. There's also been a number, though, that have been killed sort of quietly by legislative leadership, and whether that's because, you know, they're looking out for their members in tight races because, you know, maybe it's not the year they see as taking that on as the issue. It's hard to say. Those are sort of quietly pushed aside and not really discussed about why they're killed.
And then just quickly, too, I think the top 2 primary system we have now has enabled more moderate Democrats in particular to kind of get into that runoff in November, and some of them are getting elected, and I think that's also, or the fear of being challenged in a primary by somebody to the right who could do well in the general election in November. So you're seeing some of the decisions made in the legislature reflecting that as well.
Would any of the measures that failed have prevented the San Bernardino attacks?
I mean, I don't think anybody can say what something would prevent it, but there is a measure that's being talked about a lot, that's being discussed as being revived next year, that would have potentially impacted some of this. This was Senate Bill 347. It was by former pro tem in the Senate, Darrell Steinberg, and it really tried to go after assault weapons, semi-automatic weapons that could be easily reloaded. So we're talking about detachable magazines, bullet buttons. That was vetoed by Governor Brown. And, you know, there's still a lot developing in the San Bernardino case. We do know that several of the weapons that were acquired by the shooters through another party who had bought them legally were originally these types of semi-automatic weapons. We think they were altered, but I think that that's something we're going to see in 2016 brought up in the legislature. I'm not sure it'll get through there. The governor has been pretty lukewarm this week and last week to any new gun controls.
And I think of gun control sometimes as a little bit like campaign finance reform, where you plug one hole and then the money or the guns, they find their way around the loopholes. And you'll see efforts, I think, to plug some of these loopholes that do exist in California's laws, which are pretty strict, at least relative to other states.
But it does feel a little piecemeal. This week, the U.S. Supreme Court let stand a ruling, let stand a Chicago local government's ban on assault weapons. Do you think this will encourage more cities to implement such bans? And how much of a difference would it make, given that you can always drive to another state?
Exactly. And in fact, Jerry Brown from Paris said that the lax gun control laws in states like Arizona and Nevada were basically a backdoor for terrorists into California, talking about what happened in San Bernardino and just how difficult it is unless you have nationwide rules. And even that, I mean, Paris, it's tough to get guns in France as well. And the borders there are very, it's very easy now with the EU to get from one country to another.
On the flip side of that, though, we have seen gun mortality rates fall significantly in California over the past 25 years as we have enacted stronger gun measures. We have seen some success in cities like LA and San Francisco with some of these measures. We are hearing Governor Gavin Newsom, who did push stronger gun control measures in San Francisco, coming out with a proposal for a 2016 ballot initiative that would really do a lot of the things that we just discussed around making some of these semi-automatic weapons harder to turn into fully automatic weapons. He's also focusing on ammunition. So I do think that both that Supreme Court ruling and what happened in San Bernardino and elsewhere in recent months is going to push areas where there is support for this to take their own action.
Yeah, and statewide, California has a relatively low gun ownership rate. And even gun owners in California, according to the field poll recently or within the last couple of years, shows that even gun owners have some support for some measures that are aimed at limiting access to some of these semi-automatic weapons, for example. And in general, there's just a lot of support statewide for things like taking guns away from felons who shouldn't have them, and background checks and that sort of thing.
I want to ask you about something else as well. Senator Dianne Feinstein wants to require companies such as Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube to report online activity related to terrorism to federal government officials. How would something like that work?
Well, Senator Feinstein, of course, has been very concerned about this issue and also encryption, which is a separate issue. We can talk about that if you want. But Senator Feinstein has said that this particular bill that she's co-sponsoring with a Republican senator from South Carolina would not require these companies to do anything that they don't already do, but it would require them to report things that they see. So she's saying it isn't going to require them to start looking for these things, but as they come to their attention, that they would need to report them to law enforcement officials.
Sort of like what's already in place for child pornography.
Exactly.
When they spot it, they have to report it.
And these companies say that they don't want to be in the headlines about this. They're doing a lot of things quietly, but a lot of Silicon Valley too is very libertarian. And the whole Edward Snowden revelations about government surveillance resonates a lot in Silicon Valley among companies and also among users of technology, which is, especially younger people.
So how are they responding? I would imagine they're not too thrilled.
I think there's a sense in the Valley that they're being scapegoated in a way that when you look at, again, all the facts from San Bernardino are really still being investigated and rolled out. And when we hear about, people talking about immigration issues around this on the Republican side, like Donald Trump, when you hear Dianne Feinstein introducing these sorts of measures because of, one Facebook post by one of the suspects, I think some people think, well, you're blaming us before all the facts are even here. So, I think as Scott said, they don't want to be, seen as a problem in this situation, but they also don't want to be pointed as the only solution.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, this is not the last we'll be hearing on either of these issues. Thank you both for coming in today, Marisa Lagos and Scott Shafer.
You're welcome.
My pleasure.
As you no doubt noticed, we got some rain this week. Any amount of rain is welcomed at this point, given California's 4-year drought. And meteorologists say a lot more is on the way. Paul Rogers is managing editor for KQED Science and environment writer for the San Jose Mercury News. He has the latest El Nino forecast. Hi, Paul.
Hello.
All right, what is that forecast?
Well, we're not actually receiving El Nino storms yet. The good rain that we got this week, which, by the way, is going to continue through Sunday and is really the beginning of the winter storm season, that was a storm that came from the Gulf of Alaska, sort of a typical California winter storm where we have cold air and wet weather coming in. El Nino storms, which are going to begin probably in January, so about a month, are warmer and they come from Hawaii and they're wetter and more frequent than the kind of storms we would get in a typical year.
So then when are the heaviest storms due to hit? Is this going to be a long El Nino that sticks around for a while?
Yeah, El Nino conditions have been in the Pacific Ocean since March, and what they do, they don't really make storms come any earlier in the season, but they sort of beef everything up. I've heard it described as winter on steroids, right?
That does not sound good.
No, it doesn't. We'll get to that. You get more storms which are wetter and more frequent, and so the meteorologists at NOAA and the National Weather Service are saying, based on their models, it looks like January, February, and March are going to be the real wet months.
So we often hear forecasters talk about the storm door is open. What does that mean exactly?
What it means is the jet stream over the Pacific Ocean lines up in the right way so that we get a nice conveyor belt of storms moving one after another into California. And what's happened, as some astute weather watchers may remember over the last 4 years of our terrible drought, is that storms have been blocked from coming to California. They generate out in the Pacific Ocean, and we've had this giant mass of high pressure air off the west coast. Think of it as like a big mountain of dense air, 4 or 5 miles high, which has been there for so long, it's been called the ridiculously resilient ridge. And so storms hit that ridge, and like a wall, they don't come ashore. They go up into Canada, they get cold air, and then they come back, and they've given places like Chicago and New York, Boston, tons of snow the last few years. So they got our rain in the form of snow. But now the ridge is gone, which is really good. We don't know for good.
Okay.
It comes and goes, but it's gone now. It could come back and block storms, but at least for now, conditions are shaping up in ways that are different than the last few winters. So not only are we beginning to get a nice normal winter right now with Gulf of Alaska storms, but come January, it's going to be turned up to 11, as they said on Spinal Tap, when the El Nino weather starts to arrive.
So how much rain needs to come out of that Spinal Tap, as you just said, to end California's severe drought?
It's a lot, and it's interesting because the term drought is sort of like the term Silicon Valley. If you ask people, where is Silicon Valley? Nobody can really draw you the boundaries on a map, or where is Big Sur? Nobody knows exactly. It's just sort of down there. Droughts are like that. In California, there are lots of ways to measure a drought. So my belief, although a lot of scientists and water folks disagree with this, is that once the reservoirs are full, the drought is over, because you can't tell people to conserve water when we have so much that it's pouring to the ocean. We can't stop it. Some people believe we have to make up the entire rainfall deficit over the last 4 years. That would be like 1.5 years extra rain on top of a normal year. So we're not going to be able to do that in 1 year. But you could have all-time record rainfall and flooding.
Which is what we saw in 97, 98?
Correct. The last time we had El Nino conditions this strong was 97, 98, and San Francisco received 47 inches of rain. It was the most rain since 1861, and it was 230% of normal, so more than double. Los Angeles also received more than double. But what's important is the timing of that rain. We didn't have a lot of flooding in 1997, 98. We had some, but it wasn't the worst flooding year in California history because that rain was spaced out.
So is that why in 82, when there wasn't as much rainfall, and we also had an El Nino, the amount of damage was actually greater than 97 and 98?
Yeah, that's one of the reasons. Another factor is something called atmospheric river storms. We hear people talk about pineapple expresses. These are super moist, like Mississippi rivers of water coming in from the tropics. And those hit like a fire hose in specific places. And so, you know, if you have one of those, you can literally get 10 inches of rain in one day. That happened, you know, in 82 when we had big mudslides in the Santa Cruz Mountains that killed a lot of people. It's actually happened in 1994-95, which is one of the worst flood years in California history. So, you know, timing really is everything. What we want is lots of wet weather, maybe 2 storms a week, 3 storms a week, with a little bit of breathing room in between, so the creeks can go back down, the ground can soak some of it up, so we don't overwhelm the storm systems.
And the damage can be pretty devastating. I mean, looking back at 82, 83, $1.2 billion in damage, 36 deaths. What do governments and residents need to do to prepare for this El Nino?
I think what is important for folks to do is clear the gutters in their homes, trim trees that could fall on your house, get new windshield wiper blades, get new tires if you've got old bald tires. You don't want to be hydroplaning out there on the highways. If you live near a creek, know where to get sandbags. You know, get battery-operated radios, those kind of things. Because remember, in these big, giant storms, we can have power outages that last for a day or two in some neighborhoods. So we shouldn't panic, but we should basically be prepared. You know, we haven't seen an El Nino this strong in 20 years. And the last time it did, it really rained.
And then cities and counties, of course, are beefing up their shelter plans and also
clearing storm drains and things like that.
The Department of Transportation, Caltrans, is going to have some additional staff. I wanted to ask you about global warming as well. Is there a connection between El Nino and global warming?
Not really. El Ninos are sort of a natural phenomenon, and all that El Nino is when the water, which is normally warm near the equator, over by Asia, is moved along the equator because the trade winds change direction. And when that warm water moves closer to us, it triggers changes in the jet stream in the atmosphere. So there are theories that as the climate continues to warm, some of those big macro factors are going to change. But we would have El Ninos regardless of whether there was climate change.
Well, Paul Rogers, just a reservoir of knowledge.
Well, thank you. We need to fill the reservoirs.
Yes, pun intended. Paul, thanks so much for joining us, as always. And thank you for watching. I'm Thuy Vu. For all of KQED's news coverage, please go to kqednews.org.